Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to Gospel and Gaming's E3 coverage. We had part one talking about the games that's up on our website, and now here is part two, which is focused on the hardware. To my left here is Jacob Toman,
Howdy.
lead missionary. So there was a lot of interesting stuff that they talked about at E3. There's a lot of ground to cover here in terms of
Yeah.
hardware. So let's start with VR.
Okay. Yeah, that seemed to be the dominant theme of the conference, really, across the board, like multiple different companies just showing off their VR.
Yeah, a lot of different VR stuff. We'll start with the PSVR,
Okay.
which is Sony's new headset. They gave some solid details for that. That's going to be out in October, and it's going to be $399, which is the cheapest of the headsets so far.
Yeah, so far, I mean, it still requires you to have a PlayStation.
It requires you to have a PlayStation to run it. Yeah,
So in terms of the individual headset being yes, the individual headset is the cheapest, but you've also got to consider, hey, you've got to buy into their original product, the base product, the
true.
PlayStation 4. So if you've already got that, great, then it's
Great.
definitely the cheapest option.
And that's definitely one of the things they talked about on their E3 stage was, hey, if you're one of the 40 million people who already have a PS4, then you can pick up via PSVR and you're good to go. As opposed to if you want to get Oculus or Vive, you're going to need a PC that's probably costs you a fair bit more than a PS4 in order to run it. So that was one of the things that they really pushed. They said that there's going to be 50 games for it between launch and the end of 2016. I thought it was interesting. There were some different types of games there. Some were bigger games, like they had Resident Evil 7, which will be all VR from start to finish compatible for that. And then other games like the Star Wars Battlefront X-Wing mission, which you can expect will be a mission. You know, it'll last for half an
Yeah,
hour, an hour
yeah.
maybe. Hard to say.
I mean, I'm the multiplayer guy, right? So I'm super excited for where VR is going when the ability to have multiplayer interactive servers, multiple people interacting at the same time inside a virtual experience. I'm stoked for that. But the fact that PlayStation was substantially vague about the other games that would be available, they mentioned
Hmm.
two or three titles, like you've already mentioned about the specific Battlefield mission, as well as the specific Resident Evil. But then other than that, it's like, okay, that leaves 48 other titles that are going to be released for VR in between
Yeah.
October and January. What are those? Tell me more about those. So I'm excited for it. I'm excited that they're going to have a lot of titles. They
Yeah.
definitely won the battle of saying, hey, we're going to have the most
That's
titles.
a fair number of titles. I was trying to look up to see how many Oculus and VR titles are out there right now because they're both of those headsets are already available to the public. I think I saw maybe like 30 some games available for one or both of them. So 50 games seems relatively ambitious, even if some of them are going to be just relatively short experiences rather than full games.
Yeah, and it only takes one game to make a console,
That's true.
right? One great game can really launch a console from competing in an atmosphere to then dominating the market in that atmosphere, right? As being the go-to console that folks are going to purchase. So it could be that one of these 50 games is going to be that.
Hmm.
It could be that we're still waiting for that to come.
Yeah. So we'll see. They have a variety of stuff there. But it wasn't just PlayStation at the conference. They also talked about Oculus and they didn't really talk a whole lot about the Vive specifically, but Oculus was all over the place at other press conferences. They were at Microsoft's press conference. They were at the PC Gamer conference. They were at Ubisoft's conference. So it looks like Oculus, at least, is really making a push to be present in the PC space. Certainly, we'll talk a bit more about Xbox's plans on this a little later.
Yeah, I felt like Oculus didn't want to come out and say, "Hey, we're Oculus and we're going to show off our stuff." I felt like they were much more in partnership mode,
Mm-hmm.
whereas PSVR, because it's specifically the PlayStation's virtual experience, was attached to the PlayStation conference, to the Sony conference. So I really feel like almost like Oculus, like you said, was everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like at every conference you turned to, Oculus was present, whereas PlayStation was very much, PSVR was very much just incorporated at the Sony Expo, which of course, that's the way how it goes. But I feel like just from a marketing standpoint, already from a business standpoint, Oculus, even though it's a little bit more expensive, they're ready to branch out and touch multiple different angles of the industry, whereas Sony is just very, very focused on their PSVR and their PS, specifically digital experience through the PlayStation 4.
From the PC Gamer Conference, AMD announced some new GPUs that they'll have available. This had been known as the Polaris technology that they had in development, but now they've given it a formal title, the Radeon RX GPUs. And they kind of gave some information about it. They told us that there's going to be 3 different models, so you can expect 3 different price points, 3 different performance levels. The 480, which is the highest one, is going to cost $199, but they haven't given specific performance yet. They haven't told us about how these will stack up against other like comparative NVIDIA cards. So
yeah, and when you're really comparing, right, you're comparing like AMD versus NVIDIA, one being definitely considered the more household brand name, the extravagant purchase for the PC gamer, whereas the other is much more the budget, or the hey, I'm building a computer, but I'm building it on the cheap. So what can I get away with in terms of video card, rather than, hey, I really want to dump all of my time and all of my energy and all of my finances into the video card. And so it'll be interesting to see how they compare with NVIDIA and what's coming out. The price points for AMD products have always been on point in terms of reaching the market. And the fact that their top end model, the 480, is only going to cost $199, that's excellent. I mean, you're looking at a price point in between $200 to $250 for most top end video cards when they're released. And so for AMD to compete a little bit cheaper than that, if they can compete also in terms of performance with NVIDIA, then they could seriously be looking at taking some of the market.
Yeah, and they are making the push for VR with this. They have said that they want the 480 to be something that gamers can go to if they're looking to do VR on their PC. And a side note, it's interesting that the rumored PS4 Neo console, and we'll kind of talk about the upgraded consoles here in a moment that Sony and Microsoft are working on. It's rumored that the PS Neo is based on the same technology that AMD is using for the 480. So
yeah, if they are, then great. That's an awesome partnership between both of those, and that'll certainly streamline the process, I would think, at least for PlayStation's angle.
Yeah, I mean, AMD has been working heavily with console makers for a long time. All of the major consoles that are out now are using AMD tech, so
yeah,
it really shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Let's talk about something that it isn't exactly a hardware announcement, but it's very much related to how software and hardware interact, and that's Microsoft's new Xbox Play Anywhere initiative, which is their cross-buy and in some cases cross-play with games that you buy digitally on Xbox. You can then go to the Windows Store and pick up a copy of that at no additional price, or vice versa, buy it on the Windows Store and then you can play it on Xbox.
Yeah, to me that was the biggest announcement, the biggest single announcement at E3. I mean, this Xbox Play Anywhere, the whole idea that has been prevalent throughout gaming, which is if you want to play a game, you first need to decide whether you're a console gamer or a PC gamer. That subdivide, right? I mean, it's something that we've struggled with for the last couple of years, even determining, is this a subculture angle? Is this just a business choice? What is this? Because people really identify themselves as either a PC gamer or as a console gamer. I mean, it's one of the first questions that you can do to introduce yourself to a gamer, is to ask them whether or not they play PC games primarily or whether they play console games primarily. So this business model to allow people to play both on the PC as well as on their console, it kind of changes the landscape. In my opinion, it changes the landscape of what's available, and maybe is also indicative of where future businesses may go in terms of their business structure for marketing, for whether that's physical products or whether that's mostly nowadays, as we're seeing, DLC products that you just download your product direct to your machine.
Yeah, and I mean, things like Rocket League have been pushing for
Yeah.
cross-play where applicable. Obviously, there's challenges with cross-play and things like shooters and so forth, but it certainly feels like people from Microsoft and Sony are working not just on their own consoles but also on the PC. Certainly, Microsoft, since they have a vested interest in getting people to play
Yeah.
on Windows 10 devices, and in the case of Xbox Play Anywhere, trying to get people to take a look at the Windows Store rather than just get everything from Steam.
Yeah, that's what's interesting too, right? Is that Microsoft is pushing to be a market, to be a retailer,
Mm-hmm.
not just to be a place where you come and play your games, but also to be a place where you come and purchase your games. That was again another interesting change, which me as mostly as a PC guy, I hate interacting with Steam and purchasing games through Steam. So whenever there's an easier or a more succinct way to purchase a game, and if that game is then going to be available on multiple different devices, that's awesome.
First, about the Xbox One S. That was
Okay.
another hardware thing that Microsoft talked about. They announced a new, slimmer version of the Xbox One. It's smaller. It has an internal power brick instead of having the brick on the outside, and it has a very slightly updated specs, updated CPU and GPU, which they say is going to be used just for HDR. So if you have an HDR TV, slight upgrade. And Microsoft is saying that this slim version isn't that. They also announced Project Scorpio.
Yep.
The Xbox One S is meant to be kind of like a new model of the original Xbox One, and it's coming out for $299 if you want to get a 500 gig hard drive, $399 if you want 2 terabytes.
Which is a great price point. Like let's just argue that for a second. That is a fantastic price point for a current generation console. We at Gospel and Gaming, we just got my family did for a PlayStation 4, and that was $400.
Yeah.
So the fact that Microsoft is coming out again, talking about price point, affordability, trying to bring people into the market space, there's just no way to beat this price, and PlayStation is not going to compete with this price over the next year because they're selling at $400, whereas this is a new model of the Xbox One that right now at least
$400 with a game. You might be able to find some.
We'll see around Christmas.
Yeah.
We'll see if they slash the price around Christmas. But this is a new updated model, and PlayStation didn't announce anything like that for the upcoming year.
Yeah, they talked about PlayStation pretty much before E3 just said, hey, we've got our new upgraded console. That's going to be the Neo.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about it at E3. So there's really not a whole lot for us to say about
that. They
got
their butts kicked at E3. Like, Microsoft absolutely destroyed them. They just did. I know you're the Microsoft guy. I'm the PlayStation owner. But Microsoft dominated E3. They absolutely won E3.
There you go.
Sony's conference was a joke, and all of these releases that we're talking about in the video about hardware, most of them are about Xbox because Xbox and Microsoft won the conference.
There you go. There's Jacob Tillman's opinion on who won E3. So now that we've started talking about the upgraded console and all of the changes that come with that, let's talk about Project Scorpio, which is what Microsoft announced at their conference. They've started to give us some details about what that looks like. They gave us some specs specifically.
Yeah.
They talked about a GPU that's capable of pumping out 6 teraflops of computing power and 320 gigabytes per second memory.
For those of you that were begging to know about teraflops, we're not explaining them today.
No,
you can go Google it.
Yeah, it's they haven't even given all the details yet, but suffice it to say, for a console, it's pretty high end.
It's really powerful.
And it's interesting. There's also rumored specs out for the Neo, which indicate that that's probably a little less powerful. Still, a definite upgrade from what you have on a PS4. But that
Microsoft
that
won the conference. Microsoft won.
But then the challenge becomes price, right?
Yeah.
Because Microsoft now has, they're targeting a noticeably more powerful console.
Yep.
And Sony's not, and so they have the advantage potentially in the price point.
Yeah.
One of the big things when the Xbox One and the PS4, the regular models came out, is that the PS4 is a slightly more powerful console, and you could get it for less money than an Xbox One because the Xbox One also had the Kinect attached to it.
Yeah. Which went great.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the push that Microsoft was making to gamers, saying, hey, we heard you. Yeah. We've got a really powerful console. We're really confident in it.
I think these two projects, right, the One S and then Scorpio, specifically is a response right, to the gaming community. One, if you're gonna retain us, in other words, the gaming community saying, if you're gonna retain us as a console user, then you need to have a more affordable product at higher power rates.
Hmm.
Just simply, it needs to be able to do more than what the original Xbox One was doing. And this again, this Xbox One S that's coming out, it looks great, it looks sharp. The fact that the brick is internal is awesome. So that means that you don't have a brick sitting out somewhere that you're going to trip over, etc. Um, but the power point and the price point that it's coming out at, again, I think it's going to beat PlayStation over the next year until PlayStation comes out with more details about their Neo for the market point. And then the Scorpio, I mean, again, we haven't heard much about the Neo yet for PlayStation, but with what Microsoft is saying and giving us in terms of information, it already looks like a very, very promising console.
And they do need to be on the forefront of this because, I mean, the Xbox One has done well enough. I mean, from what I'm hearing, it's selling more than the Xbox 360 was at this point. But make no mistake, the PS4 is absolutely on fire in sales. It's sold twice as many
Yeah,
as the Xbox One. So if anyone has to be aggressive in this case, in terms of power, in terms of pricing, it has to be Microsoft be the one to bite the bullet because right now Sony is in the driver's seat in terms of console
of
sales.
sales. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder if we have the same conversation in a year, right? And we're looking back at E3 and we look back at the last year and we go, huh, why is it that the narrative changed, right? If the narrative changes and Microsoft overtakes, which of these hardware things do you think would actually be something that could change the landscape in terms of sales? Is there any one of these in particular that you would point to say this announcement at E3 2016 is what helped change the landscape?
I think the combination of both Project Scorpio and Neo, they're introducing this new idea of having I've heard it called a mid-generation refresh of hardware. How's that for some fancy lingo
Oh
that the
man,
gaming journalists are throwing around? But the
a
idea that
mid-generation refresh.
you
Okay,
would go and get a more powerful console,
I'm due for one of those in about 10 years.
which will play the same games. And that's the thing. We've always had console generations where you have the games that come out on one console and then the games that come out on the other console. And they're, for a year or two you get a little bit of overlap, but it's pretty distinct.
Yeah,
But here's Microsoft, and we don't have details on the Neo yet, but from everything we're hearing in terms of rumors, they're doing the same kind of thing where, hey, all of these games are going to run on both platforms.
yeah,
And so you get kind of a generation overlap. And the idea of potentially maybe being able to take your games from one console generation to the next, to the next, to the next, just like you can do with PC. I just got a new Windows 10 PC, and I can go back and I can play Portal.
hmm, yeah,
That's something that you can't do unless you've got backwards compatibility on a console. So there's a new opportunity in that sense of, hey, your library can go with you, and maybe both Microsoft and Sony can build these ecosystems where gamers can say, hey, I'm part of the PlayStation ecosystem. I had a PS4 20 years ago, and I've got whatever the latest PlayStation is 20 years from now, and I can play all of my old PS4 games just like you could play on a PC.
yeah.
But then the price of having to, a new console comes out every 3 years, every 4 years. And yeah, there's some overlap, there's some grace period, but the idea of maybe upgrading more often is something that I think gamers will have to get their minds around.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think that the key thing for Project Scorpio that wasn't announced was the price point,
Yep.
right? So, and that's something that Microsoft didn't have to announce because the Neo hasn't announced almost anything
Anything.
whatsoever. So why give away your price point
Even
now?
when the Neo is set to potentially come out sooner than the Scorpio, because the
Yeah.
Scorpio is a year and a half away.
Yeah, I'm just I'm really impressed with what Microsoft did
Yeah.
at E3 across the board. It doesn't make me regret having a PlayStation, but I will say that the next year in gaming will be very, very interesting to see what Microsoft is able to do and what they've promised with E3, especially with Play Anywhere, along with the Xbox One S and then Project Scorpio. Just the amount of power that they're putting behind their machines, and then at an affordable price point, it's actually very similar to what AMD is trying to do to compete with NVIDIA. in terms of, hey, one console is seen as the more powerful, but maybe a little bit pricier. And Xbox is now coming in and saying, no, we're actually more powerful than our competitor, and we're at a better price point, at least with the Xbox One S. So we'll see what happens over the next year.
Yeah, we will see. It's going to be interesting.